Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see so many of you here joining us today. So if you're in the audience and you're responsible for estates and assets and managing them, it probably feels as though the pressure is really only going one way. More demand, tighter budgets, and increasing expectations around things like sustainability and operational performance. What's interesting, though, is that most organisations already have the data that they need to unlock the insights to start tackling these challenges. CAD drawings, asset registers, and operational systems, it's all there. The challenge, though, is that it's often disconnected, difficult to use, and not supporting operational decision-making in the way that it could. So what we're exploring in today's panel is a very simple question. How do we turn that existing data into something that's operational and can genuinely be used to help us manage our estates and assets better? So I'm delighted to be joined by three trailblazers who are doing exactly that, but from three very different perspectives. So I'm joined by Nick Campbell-Voegt, who is the Managing Director at BIS Consult and works with NHS and higher education organisations to help them manage their complex indoors environments. We're joined by Melissa Talek, who has worked extensively across the water industry and is now the co-lead of an initiative called Stream and is responsible for managing large-scale network infrastructures. And I'm also joined by Brett Plant, who's from the University of Warwick and is the Head of Estates, Information and Systems. And he is responsible for overseeing a complex and diverse campus estate. So first of all, thank you for joining me today. It's great that you're here. So before we get into the detail, I want to start at a high level because although you work managing very different estates, there are some common pressures that we see. So from your perspectives, what's the biggest challenge in managing estates and assets today, and where is location intelligence actually starting to make a difference? Nick, let's come to you first.
Well, estates teams have a lot of challenges today which they face, but the main one that we focus on at BIS Consult is around fragmented and disconnected information. Because teams are trying to work with documents and information from lots of different legacy systems, information that's spread across different documents in different formats, and it creates a real challenge to get the information that's needed to make effective decisions, both at a strategic level and operationally day-to-day. Location intelligence is enabling teams to bring together the information they need to get a single view of that information, and that's enabling significant reduction in manual processing of data for reporting. It's enabling improvement in data quality because teams can see and then address data quality issues. And it's ultimately enabling better decision-making to help manage estates better.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And I know lots of what you do is kind of geared towards managing buildings. So, Melissa, the networks and estates that you're operating are quite different. It might not be buildings at all. It's actually probably huge infrastructure networks across big geographies. So how does that challenge show up for you?
Yeah, so you're right, the biggest challenge is, and this is the same for any utility, not just water, is that you actually have huge scale of assets and very often mostly underground assets, so you can't see them, which adds a different level of complexity. And so location intelligence is critical for those buried assets, not only where they are, but where they are in proximity to other things that might be also in the ground or above the ground. And so one example of progress in that space is the National Underground Asset Register, which has recently been commissioned and built. And that, for the first time, enables utility providers with buried assets to be able to see each other's assets locationally. So that enables them to plan excavations better, so avoiding striking other infrastructure, which causes, obviously, supply and service interruptions, but also to prevent sort of safety critical incidents happening. So it feels obvious that other utility providers should be able to see each other's assets, but it's only now that it's actually been enabled.
Yeah. Thank you, Melissa. So Brett, I think you're somewhere in between, right? So Nick, you're kind of managing buildings. Melissa, you're managing networks across huge geographies. And Brett, managing a campus, you're kind of between strategic planning and day-to-day operations. So how does this play out in your particular environment?
Yeah, so one of our biggest challenges for organisations similar to University of Warwick will be around the cost of the estate, in particular how we operate, maintain and invest sustainably. So to help us on that challenge, we need to start understanding how our campus is performing on a broader scale. And similar to what Nick mentioned, kind of the issue we started with was around that data fragmentation, having it kind of siloed in different systems and spreadsheets. So we started to surface the information that we already had. We didn't plan or didn't want to start creating new data. We wanted to start with what was already there and surfacing it into a single source of trust, a kind of centralized platform for us to view that information within. And once we started doing that, that location intelligence started to allow us to intersect kind of those integrated systems that we hadn't brought together before, trees and tree routes with underground services or lighting columns with pathways across campus. So we really started to get that momentum and those quick wins from that early adoption.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And I think already, right, there's a common theme that's coming through. And what I'm taking away is that you're all describing data that already exists, but it's not perhaps usable in its current format. So Brett, you spoke there about data fragmentation. Melissa, you spoke about the National Underground Asset Register. And I think that's what we're talking about, right? It's making that data more usable. So it'd be good to dive a little bit deeper, and I'll come back to you, Nick. So many NHS organisations already have CAD drawings and asset data, but it's often static, siloed, and underutilised. What changes when you turn that into a spatial indoors model, and why is that such a critical foundation?
So turning it into a spatial indoors model extends the value of that CAD information, and it transforms what's an asset that's primarily for design and construction into an asset that teams can use operationally day to day. It improves the accessibility and usability of that information. One trust we worked with described having a joined up picture of their estate for the first time because they had transitioned from relying on 50 different CAD drawings to just one model of their hospital, which was fantastic. Yeah. But beyond that, you've then got a platform, you've then got the foundations really for a digital twin, because you can start to layer on information about your buildings, your assets, your spaces, the people within those buildings, risk information, energy consumption, whatever it is you want to see. By giving that information or by using that information spatial context, you can start to see and understand patterns and trends, how that information is connected and interacting with other things that are happening, and ultimately, again, to make better decisions about how to manage the estate. Yeah, thanks.
And I guess you maybe already touched on some of this, but perhaps elaborating on some of it more. So once you've built that indoors model, so how does it exactly start to connect those different systems and data sets? And what does that unlock operationally that just simply wasn't possible before?
So coming back to my earlier point, estates are very complex and they often rely on highly fragmented data. So by using spatial information as an anchor, you can bring that information together and connect it in ways which just wasn't possible before. And as I said, you've got that spatial foundation. You can then overlay information in new ways to see new insights, whether that's connecting information from sensors, understanding how space is being used, understanding asset condition. You can bring it all together and see it in one place, and it dramatically improves the value of that information.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And you spoke about creating that take I know when we spoke previously, you've referred to it as base camp. I really like that analogy because you can't reach Everest if you don't stop off and take your time at base camp. Melissa, in your case, you're dealing with live assets and field data. So what are the key challenges you face in maintaining visibility and control across that kind of an estate?
Yeah, so it's a similar situation. There's so much data. And so you may have 300, 400 different applications running the end-to-end operation in a water company. And they're all, generally speaking, with ever-increasing volumes and speed of data. So if you take in the water sector, the 9 English water and sewage companies have an obligation to monitor quality of the receiving watercourse that's coming up as an obligation. Now that, for this first tranche of sites, is going to generate 1.9 million data points every day, in addition to all the data that we've already got coming off of various other sensors. Yeah. And so in a water company, you'll have your operational time series data like that, and a lot more. You'll have your transactional data, your jobs, your customer calls, and then you've got your reference data. So where is it, what does it do? And that's before you even think about bringing data in from the outside. So anybody who's worked in a water company know how weather has such a big impact on our operations. No weather is good, really. It's either bad for one or good for the other. And so that is an additional spatiotemporal data set that needs to come in and be joined up. But it's a bit like Nick said, that if you take a step back from that and say everything happens in space and time, you can start to see the keys that you can use to join this data up from these multiple different applications to get that fuller picture of what's going on in the real world.
And how is GIS helping you connect field data, asset information to the operational teams? And what impact is that having on how you maintain your networks?
Yeah, and I suppose it's fair to say, like, the water companies, I think they've gone on a bit of an evolution over the last 20, 30 years around what GIS is there to do. And actually, the leading companies will be starting to think about GIS in the context, not just around asset management, but actually around how they can facilitate looking after customers during an incident, looking after service during an incident. So, so using GIS to support card notification routes. So when something goes wrong, need to notify the customers. You might be delivering cards, you might be delivering bottled water. So using GIS in those contexts too is starting to see more and more companies using that to effectively plan and track in incidents, not just from an asset management perspective. So, but then going back to sort of some of the basic use cases of geospatial sort of analysis is that your buried assets are in the ground, so the geology and the soil, and what's happening with both the geology and the soil, probably the soil more dynamic. But understanding risk against your assets in the context of, soil temperature and moisture, because those two things have the propensity to make the ground move, which can affect your buried assets and cause leaks and bursts and things like that. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, I mean, the theme of the conference, right, is integrating everything everywhere, and that's essentially what you're describing there, Melissa. Yeah. So, Brett, bringing it back to the campus environment. So, for you, what was the trigger that made you realise that your approach to managing your campus wasn't enough and that ultimately you needed to do something differently?
Yeah, so for me, the trigger point really, so my background was in digital estates and looking at that whole kind of ecosystem of applications that we use across an estates function. And we were reviewing for IWMS or CAFM solutions, which are notably fantastic at maintaining indoor spaces and indoor assets. But we felt that it was lacking around looking at across those external spaces. And that's where the GIS solution started to really play a key part in our digital transformation, capturing trees or fire hydrants and the underground services across our campus. But then the real kind of light bulb moment, if you will, in terms of how it helped us was around that visualization. So when we could start adding data to those asset points or to our buildings across campus, we're able to very quickly start to look at trends and analysis across the campus footprint. So, for example, taking energy data and bringing that in, we could quickly see some outliers maybe and look at a cluster of buildings and ask ourselves, well, why is that building not performing to the efficiency maybe of those surrounding it?
And then, so building on that, so where has GIS for you made the most tangible difference day to day, whether that's planning, maintenance, or actually how the estate is used?
So as a centralized platform for viewing all of that data, that assets and that imagery, it's been absolutely fantastic for us, and it's been a kind of new step into that for a lot of colleagues being able to view the information in such a way, notably with drone data. So we've started to overlay our external asset information over the top of this high quality, high resolution 3D imagery, which has been captured recently across our entire campus. And that's given us a lot more insights and kind of ability to see how some of this data is interacting. So that's been notably fantastic. And we've also seen a potential return on investment already, where we're reducing the need for kind of site visits. We're able to inspect condition of buildings remotely, and also help with those kind of issue queries across our campus. On top of that, sorry, just to quickly add, our biodiversity information has been really strong as well. So we've used our own data from our own surveys. We've captured and put that aside the living atlas information from iNaturalist, and started to bring that in together to really view our habitats and species and kind of the living nature across campus, and be able to use that in a more strategic way as well to help with operational planning to make our campus more efficient.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. I mean, there are some real common themes in terms of benefits coming through that I hope are starting to be heard by the audience here. So ones that I've noticed are improving access to data, so that democratization of data, driving efficiencies. Brett, you spoke about biodiversity net gain, so it's contributing towards delivering your sustainability objectives. We've heard lots about how data can be used to inform those evidence-based decision-makings. And at its core, what I personally find really interesting is that I don't think any of you have spoken about collecting more data, but actually it's about leveraging and optimizing the data that you already have. So I'd like to bring this back to the audience and ask one more question of you all, if I may. So what would your advice be for organizations who are perhaps earlier on in this journey? What's the one thing that you'd do first to start building that momentum and proving value? Nick, let's come to you first.
Thanks, Duncan. And what we've seen work really well for clients is just to start with one use case, because there's so much that you could potentially do with this technology and with spatial information. But find one use case that's causing pain, that's inefficient, that's difficult to manage, difficult to get the information out of that's needed. Start with that and just get going, and that's what will help to gain momentum, gain stakeholder buy-in, because it will demonstrate value early on, and then you can just grow from there.
Yeah. Melissa?
I'd echo what Nick said about finding a use case and having a laser focus on that use case, because there's lots of things you can do, but actually just focusing on solving a particular business challenge and demonstrating that is really key. If I can answer a different question, is what not to do is to wait for data to be better or perfect, because that is the enemy of progress. Actually, when you start to sort of put the data either out there or share it, you'll soon know what quality it is, and that may not be apparent when you're looking at it in its raw form. And as an example of that is that we shared through Stream, we shared some data from one water company about bacteriological sample histories. They put it visualized it geospatially, and they said, what was this challenge around this particular area? Because you've got a real cluster of samples there. Looked at it, realized it was the lab, and it had been miscoded. So it had been miscoded as to where it had been analyzed as opposed to where it had been taken. And that, only by visualizing that in context of what was around it, did we actually realize that. You'd look at the raw data, you wouldn't necessarily spot that so easily. So get it used, get it out there, and also it gives you an opportunity to get it corrected too.
Yeah, wise words, and we know from previous conversations, I completely agree on the don't wait until your data's perfect, because it probably never will be. Brett, what advice do you have?
Yeah, I'll second that on the data being perfect as well. But for me, it's start with real problems, utilising that data that you already have. I think if you start to then showcase that with stakeholders and start to capture those quick benefits that you've managed to achieve from those kind of early adoptions, those early tasks. Don't be afraid to fail fast, essentially. Kind of get on with those easy wins. And I think one of the most important things for us on our journey was to show it off, to show off the progress and show what you've done within the platform. A lot of the colleagues that I work with will potentially not have knowledge of GIS systems or Esri applications, and being able to show them what we've done visually, it's very, very powerful. And it often leads to questions of, oh, can it do this? Or will I be able to put my data in and see it in this way? And that really helped gain momentum.
Well, yeah, thanks all. So some of the key takeaways, just to reiterate those. So Nick spoke about finding that specific use case, focusing on the problem and not the technology. Identify those quick wins, start small and then scale from there. Melissa, completely agree with your point. Don't wait until the data's perfect, because the reality is it probably never will be. And some really good points from you, Brett, in terms of show it off and build that advocacy. So hopefully everybody within the audience has taken something away from this session. I'd like to say a huge thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights, lessons, and experiences from across 3 very different sectors. So I'd like to invite everybody to please thank me in a round of applause for our panel members. And hopefully, so we've now got a technical demonstration, and I hope that this has set the scene really nicely. So on behalf of me and the panelists, I'd just like to say thank you for joining us today, and I really hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
A big thank you to our panel. That was fantastic. Good morning, everyone. My name's Finn Ryley. I'm joined here with Amy Bicknell-Brown to take you through our technical session. From estates spanning the entire UK to multi-level buildings with varied functions, such as the one we're in right now, estate management comes in many different shapes, forms, and sizes. In each case, managing infrastructure and assets often relies on complex, disjointed systems that often don't talk to each other, limiting the insight and operational value the underlying data can provide. Take computer-aided design or business intelligence models, for example. Hugely complex, with incredible detail, use of visualization, building design, and planning. Sometimes, building information gets locked away in paper schematics, while the rest of the organization operates digitally. This results in fragmented systems with incomplete visibility of the built environment. Finally, this brings me on to the databases of everything else, from instant reporting, room bookings, asset or infrastructure information, all locked away in distinct or siloed records. The ArcGIS platform brings all of this information together, allowing you to combine varied data sources into a single environment and deepen your understanding across your estate. With simple CAD or BIM integration, you can bring these models out of isolation, add site context, and create a platform for engagement, which makes your estate infrastructure easy to share and collaborate on. Go beyond visualization and build a true system of insights by taking advantage of the extensive analytical capabilities that GIS has to offer. Whether it's working across entire estates, individual buildings, floor levels, or space management, Amy and I are going to show you how ArcGIS supports stronger decision-making for more effective estate management.
Thanks, Finn. Now imagine an organisation responsible for maintaining critical infrastructure spread across an entire country. For example, large electricity pylons. And from time to time, these structures require routine maintenance. And before we send out any engineers, it's important for planners to answer a simple but very important question: how can we access this asset? And to do this, I'm going to use Suite for ArcGIS. So Suite is a web-based editing application designed to allow organizations to embed their business rules and constraints directly into the editing process. So instead of drawing first and validating later, Suite provides dynamic feedback, rule-based validation, and immediate insight into the impact of each edit. So Suite can be configured using no-code, low-code, or more advanced options like Arcade. So both GIS specialists and operational users can work consistently and confidently. So here in Suite, I have a pylon that requires routine maintenance. And I've loaded in a few context layers to help support this, one of them being land parcel boundaries from our partner LandClan. We can then also add in other context layers from our ArcGIS Online content or from the Living Atlas of the World, which provides authoritative, trusted data sets from Esri and the GIS community. In this case, I'm going to add in some priority habitat data. There we go. Next, we'll need to look at who owns the land that we may need to cross to access this pylon. And to do this, I'm going to select the land parcel that I just loaded in. and head into the Properties tab, where all the information from LandClan is, and this helps planners work out who they may need to contact. Next, we'll look at what type of land there is here. And in this case, we'll have a farmer, and let's say that they are growing potatoes, for example. And I'll quickly draw that into the field. There we go. And next, we'll look at drawing an access route. So if I head back into this, I'll draw the access route. I'll avoid going from the south because I know that there's a priority habitat there. And I can also see from the satellite imagery that there's a gate here to the field. So I'll draw an access route to the pylon and back. And as you can see, Suite dynamically gives us feedback for the cost that this may imply. This shows how Suite can links spatial edits directly to business logic. And finally, I'll switch to a different map where route access crosses multiple land uses. So while the earlier example was kept simple, the same setup can scale up easily to move to more complex real-world scenarios, whether that's crossing multiple land uses like land parcels, woodlands, roads, and different constraints without changing the workflow too much. And so planners can quickly test what-if scenarios and understand the implications of their decisions immediately. We'll now move to a different perspective where Finn will take us to look at a different estate and introduce the incredible work that the University of Warwick are doing.
So, as we've heard from Brett, the University of Warwick have created some fantastic applications. And here what we're looking at right now is a 3D mesh of their entire estate. Now this has been captured using drone imagery. There's just over, I think, 39,000 images. And the resolution is mind-bogglingly insane. So I believe it's 1 centimetre on the buildings and then 2 centimetre ground resolution for the rest. And this covers their entire campus, not just the areas that I showed you. Now, these data sets look fantastic, but we really want to start supplementing this with some of our estate information. So, wrong tab. Here we've got a site development that was happening during when those drone surveys were flying around. And we can see what the area looks like, just to get a bit of situational context. What we can do is bring our BIM models or CAD designs into ArcGIS. And this really starts to bridge the gap between design and real-world context. And this allows us to move from drawings to connected assets. As BIM models, they usually die after handover. And so what GIS does, it extends that life cycle value, unlocking the cross-discipline benefits like spatial analysis, spatial relationships, networks, and other impact zones. So going beyond just viewing your CAD or BIM data sets and making best use of that mesh data, Warwick have also collected thermal imagery across their estate. Now, I think this looks insane. But as well as looking good, it actually needs to do something. So we can see that the yellow areas, they represent those that are hotter, tarmac. We can see the cooler areas, of course, the roofs. So this darker purple represents the cooler roofs and slightly warmer in the lighter blues. And we can start to look at, what's the insulation in those buildings? Could we improve this from a sort of environmental standpoint? And beyond looking good, Warwick have also aggregated this information to building level. And we can start to see thermal leakage, say around various windows or roof infrastructure like piping or air conditioning units. And I'm a big believer in capture once and use many times. So within ArcGIS, a small application has also been created where we can take that 3D mesh and draw a profile across a building or some vegetation, for example. I can quickly see what that data looks like. Now, it's not just in ArcGIS. I can export this information, analyze it, but this really just shows how you're making best use of the 3D mesh and 3D data that you've got available to you. Now, another fantastic use of that mesh that I think Warwick have done is assess their entire estate in terms of the building conditions and identify defects. So here, these yellow dots represent a condition report for every single building. Now, if we check out the Faculty of Arts again, we can see the various details that have been submitted. If I click on the right dot. And here we can see various images from the roof taken during those drone surveys. Now you can imagine how tricky that might be to get with getting access or scaffolding, for example, particularly for every single building across the entire campus. And we can also see various other information that's been added. So for example, the condition grade, it's good, it's a fairly new building, the remaining lifespan, and the priority of any works needed to be done for that building. But say we were to head to a slightly older building across the campus. I believe the Westwood Teaching Centre is over here. Here we can see the condition grade is B, satisfactory, but a slightly higher priority rating because the lifespan is slightly shorter, 3 to 5 years potentially. And various additional information such as the remediation works and costs have been added for this as well. And this starts to allow you to prioritize which buildings, which defects to focus on first. What's really interesting, I think that was captured from this drone imagery, is you can see the pooling water that's starting to accumulate on the roof. Now, say you had an internal network data set of electricity network for this building. You could start to see if that network aligned or sat underneath some of the pooling water areas. If that would start to leak on, say, a server or data center that you had in that building, that could be quite a significant issue for your organization. And by submitting a defect report, we can see that information has actually already been submitted. So the potential cost of remediation works, and also some pictures that have been taken in situ. Now, I keep mentioning these condition reports, so let's have a look at one. These have been built into the application. So I can zoom in on my imagery, submit any supplementary information, and add the various other contextual insights that might be useful for the defects that I'm looking at. Now, so we want to have a look at one of those drone images. So here we're down, and we can down in the Gibbet Hall area of the campus, southeast, and we can see the various drone flight paths and all the image locations by these dots. Now, I want to have a look at the Gibbet Hall Academic East building. Hopefully, you'll agree the detail and outputs from these are incredible, with real benefit to the organization and University Estates team. But you don't need a complex model to get started.
So although what Finn has showed us is incredibly amazing and very useful, effective estate management can also start with simple building data. So this annual energy and carbon report in Experience Builder is built around a simple 3D campus model. And the key point here is that ArcGIS is being used as a central data store and not just a map. So following their declaration of a climate emergency in 2019, the university needed a way to understand how its estate performs at a building level. So this app brings together energy, carbon, water, heat, and solar data for almost every building on campus. And from a user perspective, it's very simple. Selecting a building provides you the name, the building type, the year it was built, and then, in this case, the total carbon emissions. If we then head over to the electricity intensity tab, you can see that the building I've selected here, this science block, has a relatively high electrical demand once size is accounted for. And if we head over to solar PV capacity, we can see all the buildings with solar infrastructure installed. And again, selecting on a building provides you with the context. And what you also might notice on all of these maps is that trees are also mapped as individual assets. And so selecting a tree provides you with the botanical name. And so that environmental data becomes especially important when we shift from above ground to below ground. And so everything that we've looked at so far has an underground counterpart: roots, foundations, and buried services. And that's where the Permit to Dig app comes in. So using Experience Builder, this app is designed for staff and contractors to assess what infrastructure exists before excavation or any maintenance work begins. So one of the first layers that you'll see is the trees that we just had a look at, and also a calculated estimate of the root spread. From here, users can build up an underground picture. And if we turn on all services, you can see just how complex the subsurface environment is. However, each utility layer can be toggled on and off, depending on what the user needs. For example, I can turn everything off except the water services. So this helps reduce visual clutter and allows the user to focus only on the infrastructure that they need, but the rest of the data is also there if they need it as well. So behind the scenes, this data comes from on-site observations, electrolocation surveys, and ground-penetrating radar. And with all underground surveys, there are known tolerances. So this app is used more as a decision support tool and not a guarantee. But its value is in bringing multiple data sources into one clear, consistent GIS view. And so by using a shared GIS interface, Warwick improves coordination, supports safer excavation, and aligns day-to-day operations with HSG 47 guidance. Now that we've taken a look at what can be done underground, Finn is going to take us to another estate and then also look indoors.
Jumping up a few scales to an estate near the size of a small city, the CERN Physics Laboratory in Geneva operates across 18 different sites with over 700 buildings. Supporting over 12,000 visiting users and scientists on an annual basis, spatial planning and navigation can be a real operational challenge. To address this, CERN have converted their indoor CAD plans into indoor ArcGIS models. And this has been turned into a geospatial database. This enables floor-level mapping, estate-wide navigation, and integration with enterprise systems, all accessible through internal mapping applications, as well as this public-facing CERN map that we're looking at now. So say we're visiting the site and we wanted to figure out how to get across the different areas. They've got the various transportation routes that span across the whole site of the CERN Physics Laboratory. What I also really like is there's various points of interest. So here I can see the bus stops and when the next buses are scheduled to depart. As well as this, they've also got various different points of interest. So accommodation, which room you're in, conference meeting rooms. I really love that it only takes me 2 clicks to find where the nearest defibrillator is, for example. CERN have also added ultra-high resolution aerial imagery, which is incredibly detailed and looks incredible. But say we were to look at those indoor models as well that I mentioned earlier. CERN have converted those CAD plans into indoor models, so we can see below ground, as well as above. And this is incredibly helpful for navigating your way around the organization, as there's built-in walking routes, cycle paths, as well as those bus options too. Finally, let's head down to the space management level. And here we've taken a BIM model of a library and brought it into the centre of Cardiff by removing a car park. Now, this model has all of the incredible detail that a CAD plan would have. And if we turn off the outer shell of the building, I can start to see some of that incredible detail of the building. Now, let's jump down to floor level 1. And you'll see the various different room functions. And this is where these BIM models, they start to absorb the extra contextual information and really start to come alive. So we've got a live feed for occupancy. We've started to use some of those spatial tools by calculating the area function. And similarly to Warwick Estates, we've got that instant reporting to see if there are any outages or works that need to be done. And as well, we've got that asset information. So I can click on fire extinguisher, for example, and see when it was last inspected. Now, really absorbing those other data sets, we've got things like room booking information. So I can see when James last booked that room, the teaching event, how many people are going to be there. And this is really just a good example of these CAD datas not dying after a project handover, coming into ArcGIS and growing further to enhance your estate. So this all just started as BIM data, a model that you might receive at the end of a project. This is really just the beginning. It's yours to take advantage of, bring into ArcGIS, and combine those rich data sets to build on top of. Hopefully you'll agree that by bringing estate data all together into one place can be hugely beneficial for your organisation.
Thank you, Finn, and a massive thank you to the panel today and to the estates team at the University of Warwick, who are doing some truly incredible work, some of which we've been able to share with you today. Hopefully, we've shown you the benefit and the value of managing your assets and estates in GIS, turning data into actionable insights. Thank you for being here today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.